Take your seats. We'll get underway very shortly here. I'd like to welcome all of you to the third meeting of the Interim Joint Committee on Transportation for the 2023 Interim. Before we call roll, I'd like to remind everybody to silence their cell phones, including me. Also, the meeting materials are currently available on the Transportation Committee page at the LRC website. I assume the Wi-Fi is working today. With that said, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Senator Berg, Senator Carpenter, Senator Mills,
Who'd you say had some?
Senator Smith,
Okay.
Senator Storm, Senator Turner,
There he is over there.
Senator Wheeler,
Here.
Senator Williams,
Here.
Senator Wilson, Senator Yates, Senator Branscombe, or Representative Branscombe, excuse me,
You're excused. I'm here.
Representative Bridges,
Yes, here.
Representative Dixon,
Here.
Representative Elliott, Representative Fleming,
Here.
Representative Hale,
Present.
Representative Heverin,
Here.
Representative Herron,
Here.
Representative Hodgson, Representative Huff,
Here.
Representative Imes,
Present.
Representative Lewis,
Here.
Representative McCool,
Here.
Representative Neighbors,
Here.
Representative Palumbo,
Here.
Representative Roberts,
Here.
Representative Smith, Representative Tackett Lafferty, Representative Thomas,
Present.
Representative Upchurch,
Here.
Representative Wesley,
Here.
Representative Williams,
Here.
Co-Chair Blanton,
Here.
Chairman Higdon.
Here. We have a quorum.
We do.
We do have a quorum. With that said, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the July 18th, 2023. We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. Today we do have Representative Wesley has an introduction he would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to just welcome my visitor here today. She's 15 from Powell County, interested in politics. Her name's Kinsley Kidd. So if you could make her feel welcome today, thank you.
Representative Hale has a guest to introduce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to introduce a guest here with me today. This is my grandson, Gavin Hale, that has came down to be with us today. And I wanted him to answer the roll call, but he chickened out at the last minute there. He said, "You answer it, Papa," or "You answer it." So glad to have Gavin with me today.
Gavin, welcome to the committee meeting. Take notes. One of these days you'll be sitting here. Okay. Won't be long, Gavin. Time passes by fast. Our first order of business today is a presentation from Eastern Kentucky University about the aviation program. If you gentlemen come forward and introduce yourself for the record, and please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My co-pilot here, I'm David McFadden, president of Eastern Kentucky University. My co-pilot here is Dennis Sennett. He is the director of EKU's aviation program. Amazingly, he's going to let me fly today, but that is not typically how it works when we are together. But it is great to be here with this esteemed committee, and especially with the two outstanding distinguished guests that we've got here today to talk about Kentucky's only four-year aviation program and the work that we're doing and how we're supporting the Commonwealth and the Commonwealth's success. I do see some fellow colonels out here in this crowd, so it is good to be with you today. So we will try to work through this presentation. I know we're on about a 10-minute timer here, so we will try to work through this update for you all. First, let me give just a quick history of the program. Our flight program started in 1982. It was a program that was visionary in many ways, thinking about what perhaps Kentucky's economy would look like as we sit here in 2023 with supply chain, logistics, aerospace, and aviation as major drivers of Kentucky's economy today. You can see the evolution of this program as we started to offer courses, as we moved into offering our FAA 141, and ultimately where we find ourselves today as Kentucky's only 4-year program with over 425 students enrolled in our flight program, with nearly 40 aircraft stationed at the Central Kentucky Regional Airport. And if you are in that flight pattern, we are flying all day, every day, day and night. So it is an exciting program. I will tell a funny story. My first day on the job as president, it was about 6 o'clock. I got a phone call. They said, "Mr. President," I was not accustomed to hearing that yet, "we have a bit of a situation." I said, "Yeah, what's the situation?" They said, "Well, we have a Cessna 172R. Do you know what the R stands for?" I said, "I do not." They said, "It means retractable. It means retractable landing gear. The retractable landing gear is not working, so we are going to land this aircraft without any landing gear." I said, "Should I come?" They said, "No, absolutely not." Anyway, they landed that aircraft, the flight instructor and the student, with absolutely no issue. Maybe just a little bit of paint that needed to be replaced, and back up in the air we worked quickly. So great program, great students, and most assuredly great flight instructors. Go ahead, Dennis. Quick snapshot on aviation, rolling back to 1992. You can see the exponential growth in this program. This is now a top 5 enrollment program at Eastern Kentucky University, rivaling nursing, justice, and criminal justice, really programs that we've been known for a long time. I will say that while we are not capped at enrollment, that we don't necessarily, we're not promoting this program as much as we could, because candidly, there is some investment that we need in this program in order to be able to fulfill the students' expectations, to meet the FAA's requirements, and most importantly, make sure that we're giving the experience that we want to through this program. But as you can see, with over 425 students slated to be with us this fall, the largest class of students ever. Kind of talking about what differentiates us in the marketplace. I think if you look around, we're the only school in Kentucky that does this. But really, if you kind of draw that circle, we're in a space where we can own this flight experience. And what you'll see here is that comparing us with Ohio State University, Middle Tennessee University, and Auburn University, all great institutions, we are the most affordable option to get your 4-year degree, plus all of your requirements for the 141. We have a 99% hire rate. I'm pretty sure that the 1% just opted not to work in the flight area, because I promise you, employers are lined up to hire those students long before they've graduated. And in fact, once they finish certain parts of their required criteria, many of them are being recruited at that point in time to come and get in there and get the rest of those hours completed. We do have 31 aircraft on the ground. We are currently trying to acquire aircraft. We fly exclusively Cessna 172s, along with 2 Piper Seminoles for multi-engine training. We are continuing to look for expansion, but we're really trying to stay in that vein of staying with the Cessna training aircraft. And I think Dennis could speak to the reliability and the viability of using that aircraft. I will say the pandemic has had an impact on this industry. The availability of parts and maintenance, just the availability of planes, it did create kind of a market squeeze. So we're trying to still kind of dig our way out of that as it related to the availability of those necessary parts and equipment to do the maintenance on those. Central Kentucky Regional Airport, we are proud that this body approved 2 years ago an exception that there would be the opportunity to have a municipal airport that could have a full voting member that included a public regional institution. So now we are the 4th owner and operator for Central Kentucky Regional Airport with the City of Richmond, the City of Berea, and Madison County. It is a great partnership, and one that we're very proud of, and one that works really well for Kentucky's 3rd busiest airport behind Louisville and CVG. The Central Kentucky Regional Airport is the 3rd busiest airport in Kentucky. You can see not just enrollment grew, but flight hours grew. And that's the important part. When you talk about these programs, the first question parents and students, and these are an informed group of consumers, the parents and students who are looking for a flight program. They want to know, am I going to fly? Am I going to fly in year one? Am I going to fly as a freshman? And so you can see there that we are always looking for good weather. It is good. The wind's been a little challenging this summer, but we are flying again all day, every day. And then we have students from 25 states who have chosen this program. This is a major economic driver for our state. It brings students from all over the United States, but most of them fall in love with the bluegrass while they're here, and so there's a great opportunity to keep them. And then, of course, our aviation instructors, they are the lifeblood of this program being successful and being safe. Real quick snapshot of the competition. This kind of gets into something that I wanted to touch this group. You can see from Ohio State to Kent State to Auburn to Middle Tennessee, there has been significant investment in the aviation programs at the public schools in our competing states. You can see the types of facilities that they have, the investment that they've made. Several of these are university-owned or state-owned through the university airports. Some are partnership agreements like we have with Central Kentucky Regional Airport. But you can see that the competition is fierce, and as you look at their facilities, that they are very competitive and very attractive in that way. Go ahead. So kind of what do we need here? Currently, our training space just does not reflect the quality and the professionalism of our program. If you've ever visited Central Kentucky Regional Airport, the EKU Aviation program, taken a discovery flight, come to our Aviation Day. If you come down and join us for a football game, the Aviation Department is always running those flights those days if the weather will permit. Super professional staff, outstanding students in the program, but candidly, our space does not reflect that. I think that as we're recruiting students, that they always want to see where are the planes, where am I going to fly from, and it is a challenge for us to get over. As we look at compliance with the FAA, this is the one that worries me the most, and that is our ability to do the 141 is contingent upon meeting the FAA's requirements. And currently, we are really pushed to the max on the facilities that we have to provide the appropriate space for briefing, debriefing, student learning engagements, and those need to be conducted in a private, if not semi-private environment to do that. So kind of taking a look at where we're at, we have, in good Eastern Kentucky fashion, Representative McCool, we've got very creative. So we have double wides, we have triple wides, and we have used some FEMA trailers and done some things working with our partners at the Bluegrass Army Depot to try to accommodate the space footprint that we're on. But we have really outgrown the opportunity that we're in. And so we're very grateful that House Bill 192 provided kind of the first step to really start to address some of our issues, and that was half of those funds were earmarked for aircraft. We had been leasing aircraft for a significant amount of time. That was creating, one, a major financial burden, two, a real supply chain issue with getting aircraft. So owning the aircraft has really given us control of our future in that way. And the balance of that money, which we have used, and this was obviously pre-pandemic when we were scoring this out, was geared toward doing site prep and architectural planning for really a large-scale expansion of not only the general aviation space and terminal space, but also for the flight school in general. So from a facility improvement standpoint, we've been working with our partner, Branstad Carroll Architects, and we have laid out kind of a vision for our facility improvements and a flight school that will be reflective of the quality and the size of the program that we want to run here. And as you'll see, we will be building a full-sail flight school on the south side of the Central Kentucky Regional Airport. We would be adding additional apron space and space for hangar storage and aircraft storage and additional maintenance for that. But it will allow us to move all of our flight simulators and all of our instruction to a single site. Currently, students are driving between the airport and campus to do simulation instruction versus their actual flight time. And I would say that looking across the nation, the best of these programs really roll all of that into one space and do it in kind of a one-stop shop. And so that is our vision for moving forward, and we will have a request in this upcoming biennial budget for a $25 million capital investment at the Central Kentucky Regional Airport to build a first-class flight training facility. with that, Mr. Chair, I would yield to any questions.
Well, I'm sure we'll have some. Thank you for that presentation, but I guess the million-dollar question is we know you'll make a budget request, and I think there's a lot of support in this room to take you all from very good to outstanding. And so dollar-wise, I know you mentioned $25 million, but dollar-wise, what do you have in mind?
Yeah, so really, this is purely a capital investment. This is not buying simulators. It is not buying. It is not paying salaries. This is purely a capital investment. Moving dirt, as we all know today, is much more expensive than it had been before. But really, that would get us for a full one-stop shop to let us really accommodate a student body of in excess of 500 students, getting us the appropriate facilities for briefing, non-briefing, student engagement space, instructional space, classroom space. There will be some flex in there where the general aviation community, there will be some opportunities to intermingle. But I will say, in visiting Auburn and Ohio State and some of our other competitors, or sister institutions in that way, that there's a clear bifurcation between the general aviation activities that are going on in an airport versus the flight training that's going on there. And in fact, that's not only kind of what the commonplace is, but I think it's what the FAA wants. The most integration is making sure that who's taxiing, who's on the runway, who's going in and out when they need to go in and out. But candidly, separating just the aircraft from the flight school, from the general aviation community is something that's going to make our life a lot easier to manage in the situation that we're in, and reduce any of those mishaps that you may have just with those aircraft.
Well, thank you for the outstanding job that EKU's done to developing this program. Senator Berg has a question.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very interesting presentation. You said you have a 99% higher rate, and I'm assuming that's in the chosen profession. Do you have an idea of what your average starting salaries are and what your anticipated income? That $56,000, I'm assuming, is for a 4-year program.
That's correct.
So I'm just trying to offset those costs. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
Thank you for the question, ma'am. Yeah, surprisingly, so our students, after they graduate, it's a 4-year program. They become a CFI. They have about a year and a half to get to that 1,000 hours before their first full-paying job at a regional airline. And the regional airlines are starting salaries probably $80,000, $85,000 rapidly on their first year, and then within a 2 or 3 year period, they're pulling 6 figures very easy. Regional airlines, which vast majority of our students, pro flight students, are going to, are offering signing bonuses at our career day. So the spring of our graduating senior year, we have a career day. Regional airlines come, and it's again, I use the acronym, the analogy of the pro football, the college football player that's going out. They're getting signing bonuses of $25,000, $30,000, $70,000 just to sign on to join a regional airline. They go continue flying to get that 1,000 hours, and then off they go to their first career-paying job. Again, $80,000, $90,000 first year, and then rapidly above six figures soon thereafter.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Yates. Microphone.
Thank you. I'm so close to you, I feel like I just yell at. First of all, appreciate the program. A lot's changed. I keep seeing these great expansions and changes to the EKU since I used to go down there as a party school. But a young man that was very interested in becoming a pilot, he started logging in his hours here ahead, and he was looking at different schools. He wound up going to SIU. So I was kind of looking at comparison, like what is the best practices, because you mentioned trying to separate the aircraft from the school and that being for the general community. I was wondering like how often that's actually done in the universities that do these type of programs. And then the bigger part, when we're looking at the 25 million expansion, I know that having traveled, I got one getting ready to go to college, so I'm looking at different universities. I see a lot where they have employer sponsored part in the university, whether it's they give because they have a huge benefit of turning out 500 students into their area. So they may be interested in, a $3 or $4 million gift over 10 years or whatnot to have, that part. Is that something you're also looking into working with?
Yeah, so I guess two-part question there. As far as the kind of the aircraft, and obviously you're staging aircraft, you're moving aircraft. Anytime you have inclement weather, hail, heavy winds, you're moving aircraft from tie downs outside to try to get them into a hangar. If you try to commingle that with the general aviation space, T hangars work well if they're separate in that way, but in a lot of cases for us, we're loading them into kind of more of an open floor plan hangar to get those in and out. And of course, they do a great job of doing that. We also may fly some aircraft if we think we're going to have really inclement weather that's acute to our region to other locations. So I do think that separation from the general aviation community to your training, I guess I would kind of liken it to, the driver's training experience versus, kind of the general operating public. And so I think that having that just gives some more controls. It gives the opportunity to teach and learn. And perhaps there's maybe not so much urgency of the person behind you who's trying to taxi out, who says, I really need to get out of here and get going, particularly corporate traffic, when we're trying to, do an instructional activity with a student. So that helps tremendously in that way. As it relates to kind of donor engagement, sponsorship engagement, we've had some of those conversations. I will tell you, and I don't want to speak for any of these industry partners, but I think for a lot of those who are hiring those students, I think they all have the perception that they're going to get that person from the other provider, that we're going to increase our signing bonus a little more. We're going to offer some more benefits. We're going to do those things. So getting them to look down into kind of vertically integrating and say, let's start at the beginning and let's invest in the programs that are educating students has really been a tough hurdle to get over without there being deep strings attached. And I think that, I don't want to speak for Dennis, but we don't want to say we're just a Delta school or we're just a United school or we're just an American school, because candidly, a lot of our students are going to want to go and find the thing that fits best for them. And so I think a no strings attached notion that we're going to produce 200 new pilots every year who are going to go out and be ready to go into the workforce, that trying to really bridge that gap with them from a purely philanthropic standpoint has been more challenging than I may have expected. But I do think that from an economic output and an economic investment standpoint, that for the Commonwealth to have one flight school that can try to source this workforce that is hopefully going to continue to power a strong aerospace and aviation supply chain logistics economy in our state, I think it's a good investment by the taxpayer. But I do think that, trying to get that engagement from our partners happens well. I will say that the folks, particularly Bluegrass Airport and Eric and his team up here, they've been great partners. There's been a lot of good partners, but I think when it really comes to that investment, that getting over that hump of writing that check has been something, Dennis, we've just not got to. So.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Senator Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And maybe you kind of covered this earlier, but I guess somebody that graduates from your program, I mean, at that point, what are they qualified exactly to fly, or does that vary somewhat depending on the student?
No, sir. They're qualified commercial pilot. They can fly anything fixed wing other than a helicopter. They're clear to fly. So our graduates go, the majority of them end up flying for the regional airlines, the Envoy, the Delta Connection, the United Express type things. But many of them choose to go corporate. A lot of them end up going out west, flying, crop dust, anything and everything that's, again, fixed wing. Our students are qualified to fly.
Okay, and maybe a brief follow-up, Mr. Chairman. And I'm not very familiar with being a pilot or anything. I'm not one, but I mean, I guess the transition from say like prop planes to jets. Do you all have like partnerships so that students can learn to fly different types of aircraft while they're there?
No, sir. We do not have any partnerships with any jets, turbine-powered aircraft. All of that is done on their initial first paying job at those regional airlines. That's the transition that they make.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would say, Senator Wheeler, I too am not a pilot, and I kind of thought the same thing and thought, well, but the science of, and the Wright brothers kind of broke it down. It's simple, but it's complicated. But I think at the end of the day, those pilots are ready to understand the science of flying, and obviously the FAA has many credentials and ratings that have to be kept up that whole time. And so that is kind of the other layer of that, is whether you're flying a King Air or whether you're flying another aircraft, you've got to keep your certifications up in that space.
Representative Hale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting. I couldn't actually read the numbers on one of the comparisons there of the students. You had, I think you said in your 2023 was what was it, 400?
Yeah, we'll be at 425 this fall.
Okay, how does that compare with the other schools there?
Yeah, you can see here that Ohio State's about the same size as we are. Kent State's about the same size as we are. Auburn's at 606, a little bit bigger than us. They own their airport. I don't know if you've ever flown in there on game day. It's hard to get in there, I understand. And then Middle Tennessee, you can see, who's right down the road, 1,226 flight students there. The state of Tennessee has invested about 70. They had a $62.5 million appropriation just 2 years ago. Had another $5 million added for inflation, and my understanding is they're going back for a little more this year. But they are building a full flight campus with that, and that is flight, dining, housing. They're really going to do it all in a one-stop shop at Middle Tennessee.
And the cost, Mr. Chairman, just one more question. And the costs compared to those were what?
Yeah, I think you have to look at the time period in which they were built. I mean,
no,
so,
I mean the cost of the.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, programmatically.
Yes.
Is it? Go ahead. Sorry. That's what happens when I fly. You can see right here we're 56.
Okay.
Ohio State's at 95. Middle Tennessee's at 75, and Auburn's at 95.
I think that's a great program, and I'd love to see some of my local students get interested in that. But thank you very much. I appreciate that very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I'm behind the camera here. With the passage of HB 9, is Richmond, is that Madison County? Is that eligible? Is that one of the 40 counties that was with the coal severance? It was not?
It was not.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say that would be a good source for the pulling down some of that $25 million, though.
We are an ARC county, just not distressed. So.
All right. Thanks.
Senator Berg has a follow-up question.
Thank you for your indulgence. I really appreciate that because this is just so interesting. 2 questions. This is a 4-year program.
Yes, it is.
And the second question, because I do believe in the value of a education on top of a profession. Do you all teach, do they go through a regular college degree as well?
Yes, so they'll have a bachelor's degree, which is commingled with their flight training. So those are 2 embedded but distinctive experiences. So a lot of the instruction that they're getting, that's getting their necessary FAA requirements going through the 141, will translate directly into university credits, but they will also still take a lot of the university experience. I mean, they're not just going for workforce training here. They're getting a full bachelor's degree, and I think that as we think about individuals who are sitting in the cockpit making decisions, we want them to be broad thinkers. We want them to be critical thinkers, good communicators, and so I think that you can compare that with perhaps someone who goes into this profession with a purely military background. I mean, I could let Dennis talk about he served in the military, went to arguably the best graduate program for flight training at Embry-Riddle. But I think there's multiple pathways here. But I will say that this is a space where I think people think about automation in this space. I don't know when we get to the point where we're going to get on a plane and not want a couple of people behind that door, but that question has been asked in these types of committee meetings before about is this what's the future hold here? So,
thank you,
Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We spoke briefly in the hall, but could you give me or give the committee sort of a quick high-level perspective on the other avenues in the aviation or aerospace engineering path that EKU offers? As you know, pilot is obviously got to fly the plane, but you got the mechanics, and you have fabrications, you have avionics, equipment. You have aerospace engineering type of degrees. Could you give me more of a perspective of what goes on in terms of having a more holistic approach to aviation?
Sure. Let me give a really broad Kentucky landscape picture, and then I may let Dennis talk maybe just more specifics about the industry and where it's going. So at EKU, the flight training program 141, we've talked about that here today, kind of partnered with that is the aviation management program, which is also growing significantly. So all the other operations that go on at an airport, from the tower to just keeping things on time in the places they need to be, the leadership and management of those airports and those spaces is a growing sector as well, and one where we need capable, qualified professionals working. We just launched our manufacturing engineering program at EKU. Our hope is to have an aerospace aviation kind of track inside of that as we kind of blend together some of our strengths. And then we look at our unmanned aircraft space, and that's something where we're doing more and more, and this is becoming a more regulated space, and so the rules seem to kind of continue to evolve in this space for unmanned aircraft, which is one we want to be on the front lines as well with. As far as AMTs, aviation mechanic technicians, there are two programs that are state-sponsored in the state, and those are both with the community college system. Somerset Community College has one. Dr. Kerry Castle is the president down there. In fact, that's his background. He was in the Air Force, has a background in that space. They're doing a great job. In fact, he and I were just together about 2 weeks ago talking about that program and what's going on. And then Jefferson Community College, I think Hannah, she's still back there. Yep. Jefferson Community College also has an AMT program. We looked at AMT pre-pandemic as an institution. We were trying to do an ARC partnership to try to bring this into rural Kentucky. The pandemic was a disruptor in that space. I also think that it's a chicken or egg question, and in some ways, where are the jobs going to be if we train this workforce? And I think trying to get that capital sector investment is critical. There is a lot of aerospace and aviation investment in this state, from brakes to components to those things. There's that kind of work going on all across the Commonwealth. There's an inventory of that. I think the Economic Development Cabinet has that. But as far as kind of the industry next steps, Dennis, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I'll just add, sir, that highlight a couple of things. The management side that the president said in the UAS, and then I'll talk the industry. But the management side, the pilot shortage is what's getting all the visibility, all the national news, and rightly so. But for every one pilot job that's available, there are five positions that are short on the management side, as the president was addressing, operating airport safety, management of those types of things. So there's a lot of space there that we are trying to fill as well. And then the UAS, as everyone knows, also it's the growth in the industry. It's rapidly taking over just about everything. It crosses all professions: construction, safety, fire, again, across the board. And we're trying to get our foot firmly established in that space as well. But the industry is not going anywhere. Manned airplanes, depending on who you talk to, are going to be around for the foreseeable future. As the president was alluding to, it's going to be very, very difficult, I think, and most industry experts believe it. It's going to be very difficult to be hopping in a steel tube, aluminum tube, flying at 500 knots at 40,000 feet without somebody up in the front guiding it. So all the industry experts are saying it's continuing to grow. Especially with the FAA's reluctance to get rid of the 65, the age limit where the pilots are getting thrown out of the cockpit.
And Mr. Chairman, just one quick question, which would probably be a really quick answer, and that is, could you break down the gender in terms of your students, male and female?
Yes, sir. We have currently 15 to 16% females, and the minority is right around the same percentage in our program, as of this morning when I checked.
Okay. Yep. Keep working on those numbers.
Yes, sir.
Senator Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Coming from Eastern Kentucky, and a lot of kids go through the community college system first because it's local, and what do they face, or can they join your program and get some credit for what they've already done, or do you have how is that going to work for those kids that are involved in that? That's just a question that I need to know.
You know, one thing we've worked on a lot is working with a lot of high schools. In fact, we got a lot of partners. My alma mater, Johnson Central High School, back in Johnson County, has a VR lab that we support them with, and so students are getting some experience in that space. So from a college degree standpoint, everything's transferable. They're not going to be slowed down to getting a bachelor's degree. I think the challenge for flight is the sooner you can kind of get through that progression, which is you got to log so many hours and have so many checks. The sooner you start that, the better off you'll be. That doesn't mean you've got to be in Richmond to do those things, but getting your privates, getting that work done wherever you're at, whether it's Paducah, whether it's Pikeville, Covington, Williamsburg, we try to work with students as they have the inquiry. It says, hey, I can't come this year. I want to transfer in. What can I do to try to stay relevant? And we try to be as flexible as possible, but obviously the FAA has some very stringent rules of what we're responsible for and what they have to demonstrate in that process. So on the flight side, that's maybe less flexible than the degree offering on the bachelor's degree.
One more question, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
Well, that helps me some, but just say the kid's done created 2 years of college behind them. How much more time is it going to take them to get this education that you're offering from the degree standpoint with the flying license? That's what I'm trying to clarify. I mean, if I'm not getting that clear.
So I would say that probably the biggest challenge to getting their FAA required credentials is going to be the size of our facility and the size of our fleet. It's just, can we get them up in the air and get them? So the bachelor's degree, they could go 2 + 2 no problem, and get their bachelor's. If resources were unlimited, we could probably finish them on time.
Yeah, sir, the long pole in the tent is we have a number of transfer students that come in from the community college. Most of them are, if not very close, gen ed complete, all of the gen ed. So our challenge for those type of students is getting them through the flight program, from private, through instrument, through commercial. That's the long pole. That's what takes the time. And you can't rush that. Those are the hours dependent. And again, fortunately or unfortunately, we're in central Kentucky and we're dealing with the weather. So we focus on those students and we try to give them priority to get through our program as quickly and as efficiently as possible. But it's the flight time that's necessary.
One more, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
Sorry to keep asking. So
No,
the next question then comes, can those kids fly at their local airport and get like Harlan, Williamsburg, and those places? So they can make up the time then by completing their flying time there.
Let me try to answer your question by this way. We encourage students that have the means that come into our program with a private pilot license. We are starting to see more and more of our students. That's the first license. You start off with private. But you have to, in order to earn the 1,000-hour restricted ATP, back to what the president was alluding to, the FAA requires that instruction occurs at EKU on EKU airplanes for both the instrument and commercial licenses. So that is a requirement that the FAA puts on us, and rightly so. It is very regimented. It's very structured to ensure that, again, when you, at the end product after 4 years, that those students have met a minimum standard that the FAA is requiring of us. So that flight training has to occur at Richmond with our airplanes, with our instructors.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I don't see more questions. I have a couple for you. 56,000 average cost. Is that tuition or is that just the flight time? And
That is just the flight program, and that is all 4 years wrapped into. That is the whole. That's not annually. That's the whole program.
Well, thank you. That's very good. And you mentioned aircraft going and coming 24 hours a day. So I was glad to hear you mention you had a control tower.
Well, we don't have a tower, but we got somebody's got eyeballs on what's going on all day. So, but we do hope to build. I don't know if we're going to put a tower in with the construction plan, but we will have an operational center that will have eyes on everything that's moving. So,
okay, with everything that's going on at your airport, we classify airports usually as general aviation or regional airports. what would your classification be?
Well, I guess technically it's a general aviation, but I would say by activity, it's a training facility.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much for being here today. We certainly appreciate the presentation, and best wishes on making this program one of the biggest and best in the country.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I
Yes.
I'll make a quick comment. Senator Storm and I are co-chair of the Aviation Caucus. I encourage y'all to participate in this caucus because we are discussing quite a few things, from workforce and education, but also working with Commissioner Carter in terms of the actual facilities of the 57 GA airports we got to work on in order to look at economic development type of initiatives and so forth. And so we do have a workforce type of bill in the process of being worked on. And hopefully, after Senator Storm and I discuss, we'll present this to the Aviation Caucus to get your input and thoughts and go from there. But also, we're continuing to work with the commissioner and the deputy commissioner in terms of what these 57 general G&A airports need and so forth. So it's a two-prong approach. You got the facility, so the actual airport, and you have education and workforce. Those two things got to marry over the next couple of years in order to make this happen. And we've got a lot of enthusiasm from the folks I've talked to. If you're not part of it, I encourage you to participate because we've got a lot of things, wonderful things come down the aviation pipeline. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I would say, and I should have said this earlier, the aviation community in Kentucky, from the commissioner to they are so supportive of our program and the work that we're doing. I want to say a big thanks to them that we're all pulling the rope in the same direction. So.
Okay. Well, thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Next up is renewable aviation fuel. So the floor is yours. Introduce yourself for the record and please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope you all have exhausted all your questions on our friends from EKU, so I get off scot-free. But we'll see how that works. We'll go with that. Mr. Chairman and Co-Chair Blanton, members of the committee, thank you so much for having us today. My name is Seth Cutter. I am privileged to serve as Vice President of Public Affairs for the Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International Airport, CVG. But today I am also representing the Kentucky Sustainable Aviation Fuels Coalition. I want to thank Representative Dixon and the committee staff for having us here today to talk about why our coalition believes that SAF, or these renewable aviation fuels, are a key ingredient to powering Kentucky aviation and our Commonwealth's economy in the years to come. So we'd like a good flight plan. We'll try to stay on schedule here and not encounter any flight delays. But in the next few minutes, I want to offer you a high-level explanation of what we mean when we say renewable aviation fuel, or SAF. I'll tell you more about our coalition members and hopefully offer you all a case of why Kentucky makes sense for SAF production and use in the context of our country. And finally, I'll review some concrete steps that you all might consider that would support these objectives. So before I dive into SAF 101, as it were, I want to highlight, really pick up on some of the themes that President McFadden and Dennis were talking about with what the aviation industry means to our Commonwealth. Across our three largest commercial airports in Kentucky, SDF, CVG, and LEX, direct jobs and related employment exceeds 134,000, making aviation one of the state's signature industries, as you all know. That figure does include the significant activity at UPS Worldport in Louisville, DHL's Global Super Hub for the Americas at CVG, and also KCVG, which is Amazon Air's hub at our airport. Louisville Muhammad Ali International is North America's second busiest cargo airport, and we at CVG are very lucky to now be the seventh largest cargo airport in North America. So between that activity at SDF and CVG alone, we estimate that no less than $480 million in tax revenues are generated for the Commonwealth and local communities each year. So aside from that cargo and freight, of course, the airlines operating at our airports typically transport more than 14 million passengers per year. That was pre-pandemic. And these operations and their indirect impacts yield a combined annual economic impact of more than $18 billion. So that activity, of course, as you all know, means jobs for our friends and neighbors, and it forms the basis of why aviation has become such a fundamental building block to Kentucky's economy. So we have OEMs, manufacturers, aviation maintenance companies, as we were talking about, all looking at the Commonwealth as a prime location for continued investment. So allow me to thank you all before we go on, our state leadership and policymakers for creating an environment that is conducive to economic investment in this space. That includes ensuring Kentucky remains an affordable place to live and do business, and continues to focus on ensuring we have an ample and growing supply of labor to support all of this activity. So let's jump into sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, which is what we're here to talk about. So SAF is a type of aviation fuel that is equivalent to conventional jet fuel, or Jet A, and it is a drop-in fuel. That when we say drop-in, we mean it is commingled with Jet A. So it is certified to the same ASTM or fuel standards that apply to kerosene-based Jet A. It operates out of the same infrastructure, the same engines, the same airframes, and it is currently approved to replace a certain amount of Jet A in a fuel mixture, but it has a substantially smaller carbon footprint because of how it is produced. In fact, depending on the type of SAF used, it can reduce greenhouse gas emissions compared to Jet A significantly. The regulatory bodies in aviation approve pathways or different ways that you can create SAF that certify the feedstock or the base material that you're using to be sure that it actually addresses the sustainability goals of using SAF. This also ensures the reliability of the drop-in features of the fuel, namely that the same infrastructure, the tanks, the engines, the airframes can operate using the fuels. And currently the FAA has 7 approved pathways to create SAF, and those feedstocks range from solid wastes, hardwood residues and resins, fats, oils, and greases, etc. In the United States, aviation carbon emissions represent only about 9 to 12% of transportation sector emissions. So we're a small piece of when you look at us compared to automotive. But it is very hard to decarbonize or to address aviation emissions. It's much easier to plug in an electric vehicle than you can plug in currently a plane, and I'm sure many of you appreciate that. Because of the significant reduction in carbon emissions, however, SAF is that best near-term way for us to, as the aviation industry, to curb our impact on the environment. Many members of our coalition have made very public and ambitious commitments to buy SAF as part of their fuel mix. Not only are markets creating demand for these solutions, but our customers, the airline passengers, the companies who ship with DHL and UPS, or the Amazon customer, are all more mindful of the environmental impacts of how these goods or they themselves are transported. So that business imperative is demanding SAF, and our coalition members are committed to meeting the demand. So I'd like to now introduce you to the members of our coalition, and apologize it's not easily apparent there, but we'll scroll through. We have great companies across the Commonwealth, as well as folks who are looking looking at the investment that Kentucky presents to them. We have engine makers and passenger airlines, our largest cargo partners here in Kentucky, Amazon Air, American Airlines, Atlas. You can see the logos displayed here. We have our aviation trade groups nationally, and all of our commercial airports are involved. And then, of course, with the passenger and cargo airlines, those are the folks who are ultimately the end users, right? They're the purchasers of SAF. But you have OEMs, the manufacturers like Boeing and GE Aerospace, who are vital to these efforts because of the R&D role that they play to develop the new technology. These are all companies, as I said, that have either made or are looking to make significant investments in Kentucky. And then, of course, we have folks in the energy space like Marathon Petroleum, who have a subsidiary, a wholly owned subsidiary out of Wisconsin called Virent that is in the SAF business. And then, of course, you can't see it here at the end, but you have folks down in the bottom right like Sunflower Fuels, who is a startup based out of Lexington that sees and has created their business around the opportunity that these fuels present. And they're looking at some innovative feedstock development in eastern Kentucky by repurposing abandoned coal fields with cover crops that can be used as a feedstock to create these fuels. So this is a broad group that is very committed to Kentucky and believes in the business case of why Kentucky makes sense for these fuels. So with that as a segue, I'd tell you that one of the reasons this group has formed, and hopefully one of the reasons we're talking about it today, is because the production of these renewable fuels, these biofuels, is very scarce. Demand is high, supply is very low. That imbalance, of course, causes a great disparity in price. So SAF only makes up about 1% of total jet fuel production today. But as I said, because of that expensive price point right now, and the higher cost to manufacture, it will likely be that SAF is a continued expensive proposition for the years to come compared to petroleum-based jet fuel. Again, one of the reasons it's very hard to create these fuels is you're either liquefying solids or you're trying to achieve scale in your production, and again, maintaining that chemical composition that can be commingled with Jet A is obviously a very expensive proposition. So the case for Kentucky, when you consider all the airlines that are flying here, passenger and cargo, when you look at the scale and scope of those 3 global cargo hubs that we're blessed to have, you think of all the fuel consumption that activity requires. We think of the economic development opportunity for new investments to turn these feedstocks into fuel and refine that into something that can be used. And of course, for existing companies in the agricultural space, for instance, across Kentucky, these fuels are a potential new customer to buy the feedstocks and convert it to fuel. And then, of course, for the universities, we've engaged, they're not on the slide there, but you have engaged folks at the University of Kentucky, the University of Louisville, who are in the R&D space, researching the next generation of technology for these fuels, again, and how you can scale and commercialize them for a wider use. So our conclusion, as you can see here, for all these reasons, we think that SAF is a great opportunity that blends aviation, energy, agriculture, and really our geographic position in the country where we can benefit of the economic opportunity this presents. So this map is a little bit hard to read, but that's not really the point. A lot of the production of these renewable fuels right now is happening overseas. So other countries, particularly Europe, have regulated or mandated the use of lower emitting fuels. You have a lot of production coming out of Asia. In the United States so far, there are a few projects that are coming online, and the nearest to us are in Georgia and Illinois. There have been some federal efforts to incentivize production and use, particularly over the last year. A federal tax credit to use these renewable fuels was adopted by Congress, but we have some states who are also jumping in the game. Just this past year, Montana's legislature created some incentives to incentivize production of SAF over there in the West. But this is where we really think Kentucky has an opportunity to lead. Because you're ideally producing these fuels as close to where you want to use them to minimize how much you're spending, again, minimizing those costs, minimize the cost to transport the fuel to where it's going to be used, we think Kentucky makes a lot of sense, not only to use here at places like Louisville, SDF, at CVG, but also to export to our neighbors, particularly to the south, down in Memphis with FedEx, who also is looking for a source of these fuels. So the other piece, and I shared this with Representative Dixon a little bit earlier as well, is that we think there's a really great air service opportunity for our local communities, right? From an airport perspective, we're concerned about how do we grow flights? How do we increase the amount of economic activity at our airports? And having something like SAF that airlines are really looking for is yet another reason that they would choose us over Nashville or Columbus or Indianapolis, etc. During the 2022 General Assembly regular session, our coalition was pleased to speak with many of you about SAF, these renewable fuels, and the positive impacts they can bring to Kentucky. And we were very delighted that back in 22, former Senator Will Schroeder introduced SB 323 that year, which was a legislative proposal, twofold legislative proposal on this topic. It proposed to create a $2.50 per gallon tax credit for the use of SAF in Kentucky that was produced in Kentucky, and it would have created a $2 per gallon tax credit for SAF that was consumed in Kentucky but produced outside of the state. Those measures were intended to help spur the adoption of SAF use here at our airports. To control the cost, we had proposed to sunset the incentive after 5 years with a cap of $5 million total per year between 23 and 27. The second goal was really an economic development effort, was unique to SAF because you've in previous years, it's been a while, but you had incentives on the books for renewable fuels and biofuels for which SAF could have broadly fallen under. But since a lot of those programs had lapsed, we had really pushed for a incentive around production here. So an enhanced economic development package was contemplated for new or retrofitted facilities with at least $3 million of investment, sales and use tax incentives, and other incentives based on the total capital investment would have applied. And then we considered a one-time unique element to this opportunity, which was a $10 million appropriation to KEDFA to use as a forgivable loan to fund SAF facility projects that had a minimum capital investment of at least $100 million. So the details of that legislation was based really on industry best practice coupled with what made sense and makes sense for Kentucky. So our coalition has continued to refine our legislative asks to create a package that is both reasonable but offers a meaningful incentive to create a strong business case for these fuels here in Kentucky. As I mentioned, we believe that anything that Kentucky can do to capitalize on this growing SAF industry will create economic growth impacts for years to come. And we recognize that this ask may seem significant, but we believe, given the outsized impact of aviation on our state and local communities, that it merits your consideration. And it's really an opportunity that's timely and important for us not to pass up. And finally, we know from speaking with SAF producers, folks both inside and outside of the state looking at this opportunity, that the minimum investment for, as I said, either building a new facility, retrofitting an existing facility will realize economic impact, capital investment to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's why we think it's a really good opportunity for additional investment in the space, new industry, and of course, creating new jobs that complement our existing aviation users. So we look forward to working with you hopefully in the months to come to advance these goals. And of course, Mr. Chairman, glad to answer any questions you all may have at this time. But hopefully you save them all for President McFadden. So thank you.
Thank you. We do have several questions. So Co-Chair Blanton has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cutter, thank you for your presentation. Just a couple, 3 questions real quickly. The SAF fuel, you're calling it a drop-in fuel.
Yes, sir.
It has to be mixed with aviation fuel.
That's correct.
So does that mean a plane couldn't fly on SAF fuel alone? It has to have the aviation fuel.
So it's an excellent question. There are currently, there have been test flights using 100% SAF, but that's obviously, so you have folks, as I mentioned, like GE, Boeing, Airbus, who are all testing those technologies, trying to make the determination if the engine technology can support its use 24/7. But currently, yes, it's about 30 to 50% of the composition of the total fuel mixture can use up to that amount of SAF. Yes.
So it takes jet fuel still to operate. How much is production cost on SAF? We're talking about it costs more. How much is production cost?
Another great question, sir. In terms of a per gallon price, because that's an easy way to think about this, during the pandemic, jet fuel, like many industries, it was a mismatch of supply and demand. Jet fuel usually in this year so far has hovered between $3 and $3.50 per gallon of Jet A. SAF, by comparison, is nearing or hovering around $9 a gallon. So there's a significant gap. And in that per gallon pricing, you have obviously the difference of the cost to manufacture, refine it, but then you also have really priced in there the really scarce availability of the product. So the idea is when there's this new facility that just came online in Georgia, when you have some other facilities, Fulcrum Biofuels in Illinois has a facility over there. As you start ramping up production, that price may come down and normalize a little bit, but it'll still be much more expensive than Jet A.
Okay, so I want to lay out a scenario that I'm perceiving from the presentation.
Yes, sir.
Is we want to use a fuel called SAFE to add with Jet A that costs nearly 3 times as much to produce. Then we want the government to give incentives to use this much more expensive fuel than the Jet A because we want to reduce our so-called carbon footprint. I mean, that's the only benefit it brings. It won't fly the planes. So we want to go away from fossil fuels, and we want the government to subsidize going away from fossil fuels to pay for another fuel that won't fly the plane in and of itself. I'm just trying to figure out where that this is a win-win. If it won't fly the plane, it costs 3 times as much, and taxpayers are going to have to subsidize it. Because here's what you're going to have if without some very good subsidies. I'm going to pay, as is everybody else, more to get an airline ticket when I fly somewhere. When I order from Amazon or any other company and it has to be shipped by air, that gets passed on to the consumers. That's just the reality of things. We're going to have to pay more for shipping now for products that we receive. So, I'm just wondering, and I'm looking at, is it cost efficient to be doing this? If it was flying the plane in and of itself, but obviously it can't. It has to have that Jet A fossil fuel to do that. And am I correct in my summation on all this? Or if I'm wrong, explain how I'm wrong.
I think as of today, Co-Chair Blanton, I think the assessments you're making are very valid. What we would say is that technology, as I said, these test flights are testing out what happens when the technology improves and there's greater production available of these fuels where you can power a flight totally on SAF as opposed to Jet A. So I hear you absolutely. In terms of your point about subsidizing and who pays for the fuels, I think many of our coalition members would share with you that either customers, so if you're a shipper, right, to your point, folks, companies that are shipping with UPS or DHL, Amazon customers, there are a growing number of them that are willing to pay more for offsetting some of these other costs. To your point, there will be additional cost. But we have folks, I use the example of DHL, that's a really good example. DHL is a global company. They have hubs in Germany, number one by volume. CVG up in Northern Kentucky is the number 2 global super hub and that covers the Americas region, and then Hong Kong is its Asia Pacific hub. DHL is under some increased, I shouldn't say increased, they have set a number of ambitious goals by 2030 to use these fuels. The only way, and that's for a variety of reasons. There's European regulation, customers are demanding, it's a variety of factors. The only way for them to meet their global 2030 goals is if their hub at CVG can see some greater use of these types of fuels in their fuel mix. So you have folks that are out there trying to source the fuels, and they're, again, as I said, the pricing differential is very real. And to your question, to your point, when we are making an ask of you all, we're mindful of the fact that it's a new industry, right? We don't want Kentucky to lose out on the economic opportunity that if the economy is going that way, if airlines, United Airlines is not part of our coalition, but has made many public statements of how much fuel they will be buying when it comes online, we don't want to miss out on that economic opportunity to see the production here, to benefit from the jobs and the additional investment, but certainly get your point on the pricing dynamics and the reality of what we're asking the state to step up and help contribute.
Thank you, and I will keep an open mind on the economic development side that it's going to, but right now I see it being a negative, not a positive, because of the increased cost, asking for the government incentives, and quite frankly, myself along with others have said for a long time to people outside the coal industry, wait, because once they get rid of the coal, they're coming after oil and gas, and I know it's not you personally, but this is just another part of that agenda to try to rid us of fossil fuels at a higher cost to the citizenry, and asking the government, using taxpayer dollars, to subsidize it. So I just have concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Senator Wheeler.
Good to see you again.
Yes, sir.
I think we had some great conversation a few months ago at the chamber dinner. I've got some similar concerns to my colleague, Representative Blanton. I guess in some ways I kind of see this as perpetuating a fraud on the general public, in the sense that these corporations that you mentioned all have a vested interest in lowering their carbon footprint, or so they claim. But, if they bought this synthetic fuel to put in as an additive to reduce that carbon footprint, they would have to pay a lot more. So what this essentially does, it lets them artificially lower their transportation prices by saying Amazon's still going to ship to you for, say, $2.99, when at the same time you're actually paying taxes to subsidize that. So the consumer is actually paying full freight. They just don't know it because they're paying for it through their taxes rather than directly through the shipper, which, a lot of people go online because they can get things cheaper than what they might be able to get at the big box store, or a local retailer
right.
there. But are they really getting that when we're paying them on the back end as far as their fuel subsidies are concerned? And I guess my thoughts are, if this is so important to Amazon and DHL, I guess that's Deutsche Hapag-Lloyd, right? And some of these customers, let them pay the $9 a gallon if that's that important to them. It always amazes me that the same folks that are asking us as consumers to subsidize it won't park their corporate jets, which is about the single most polluting thing that you can do as an individual. I mean, John Kerry was Mr. Green, flying all over the world, putting out one of the biggest carbon footprints, but has the nerve to say that his advocacy is paying for it somehow. And I guess that's the problem I have. I mean, and that's fine. If that's your agenda as a corporate entity, I accept that. It's a free country, but why ask me as a taxpayer to essentially pay for your agenda? And I actually lived in Germany, and the family I lived with, one of them was a college professor and was previously rather of a left-wing guy. And he's recently gone, he writes several columns for the Süddeutsche Zeitung and some other papers about how the radical push towards a green agenda has really hurt the poor and the middle class in that country through higher electric bills to the point to where, people that previously had a good
Senator
standard.
Wheeler.
Sorry.
I know you got a question in there somewhere.
I guess my question is, the consumer's basically paying for this fuel one way or the other, either through an increased shipping charge or via this tax subsidy, are they not?
Senator, I would address, thank you for the question. And first I would say the airlines that we work with, cargo, passenger, are all very concerned about, we know customers are very price sensitive. The pandemic taught us that. I think from a competitive standpoint, everyone is trying to deliver the best product for the lowest cost, right? Whether you're shipping through UPS, DHL, et cetera. I think we're very lucky in Kentucky to have essentially three options on the cargo side if you want to get your goods out to the world, or if you're a manufacturer trying to move product or widgets from Asia to the States and back and forth. We have a lot of options. To your point on cost and how that gets priced into people, I definitely hear you. And one of the things that, again, we're very mindful of is that any proposed incentives were, particularly the ones that were about tax credits on the fuel, the price per gallon, would be sunsetted. It is very much this idea of, we have a nascent industry that is, as you can see globally, is taking hold. Regardless of the underlying motives, there are some real dollars being invested. And for a short time, if Kentucky can help attract some of that investment to attract additional activity at our airports, we think that, to your point, the costs they're going to ebb and flow over time, but eventually those subsidies would go away and you would have a more mature industry that can start scaling up to Co-Chair Blanton's point, can really address that long-term price disparity, and it can normalize. But we're very aware that there's been members of our coalition like GE are looking at the next generation of engines that are electric. We have folks that are willing to pay in business aviation. The corporate users are willing to pay the higher price, to your point, to offset the emissions that they create. So this is really the way that we see things are moving, and again, we're very sensitive to that ask and are open to your point earlier. We have an open mind as well in terms of, this is not the end. What we have proposed in the past is not the end-all, be-all answer if there can be improvements made.
Okay, we have several more questions. Representative Roberts.
Thank you. Hi, Seth. How are you?
Hello, Representative.
I'm well. I'm looking around and I realize I think I'm the only Northern Kentucky lawmaker up here. So on behalf of all of Oh, that's so
Senator
sorry.
Williams.
Sorry, Senator Williams.
Yes,
Senator
yes.
Williams and I are. So thank you for being
Thank
here.
you.
I'm a big fan of CBG. I assume you are as well. My oversight. I have a couple questions. I'll be brief if I may, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I just wanted to make sure my colleagues know that, if you go to book a flight online right now, most of the big search engines, Google Flights, Expedia and stuff, they'll tell you the flights, they'll tell you the turmoil you're going to have to go through, how miserable the flight's going to be. And now they tell you what the CO2 imprint is of that flight. So it's another part of the decision tree that customers are actually making, and it's showing up in the marketplace. I was really heartened to hear you talk about what this could do for our farmers in Kentucky. So my first question to you is if you could talk a little more about that, and if you or the groups you're working with have evaluated if we have surplus of agricultural goods, what this could look like really in the agricultural market.
Thank you for the question, Representative, and Senator Wheeler, to some of your points too. One of the ways, I didn't describe it very well when I mentioned sunflower fuels, the startup out of Lexington that's really creating its business around this. Again, they're looking at how do you repurpose abandoned coal mines or the coal fields where there can be some cover crops that grow really well there. It doesn't displace food or livestock supply chains because it's not available for consumption, for human or livestock consumption, and makes a great ingredient to mix into SAF. The other piece that we know, a natural resources that we have in abundance, is hardwood residues, so saps and resins that can be scaled up, forestry byproduct that essentially can be harvested to create these fuels. And then the other piece, representative to your question, other ag products, we're aware, are pretty easily converted to liquid and made into fuels, but there's wide agreement in the industry that there's a reluctance to displace those supply chains for food. So that's why you've seen a lot of folks really double down on the HEFA method, which is the used cooking oils and greases, of which we have plenty as well, that are already in a liquid state and can really easily produce the fuel.
Thank you. Three more questions, Mr. Chairman. I'll be quick, I promise.
I'll give you one more question. We got 10 minutes to finish this. And
yes,
Seth,
sir.
You need to remember that too. Your answers need to be brief.
Yes, sir.
So let's move along, folks.
All right, I'll make this as quick as possible. Could you talk about any Kentucky fuel producers who could adapt to this? And I think before you answer that question, I'll just say it's my belief this is coming, and that the underlying question here is whether Kentucky is going to take advantage of this from an economic development standpoint, or if we're going to let it pass us by. So maybe it would be helpful if you could talk to us about any fuel producers that you're aware of in the state who could already benefit from this and the economic impact there.
We are aware that there are conversations with the Cabinet for Economic Development and certain outside of state producers that are looking at sites in Kentucky. One of the members of our coalition, it's not a secret, Marathon Petroleum Company is involved. Their subsidiary Aviation is not producing in Kentucky, but I think it's safe to say that they would like to see or are looking at potential sites in Kentucky.
Representative Roberts, I'm sorry, but I had to move along. Representative Hodgson.
Yes, sir. I currently pay $8 a quart for synthetic fuel from a Husqvarna chainsaw because they're willing to put their money where their mouth is, and they'll triple my manufacturer's warranty if I run that. And you actually save a little bit of money in maintenance cost on your chainsaw that way. But that does not appear to be the case for jet aviation fuels. You said your SAF does not increase or decrease the performance of the aircraft. It's just a drop-in fuel as a replacement for what's there, and it's 2 or 3 times more expensive. So it would appear that the only benefit is perhaps to boost a corporate ESG score, or for customers to feel better about spending more money to fly the jet. And we've only recently passed legislation to make it illegal for a pension fund manager to consider ESG score in their investing decision. It seems that would be contrary to the direction we're trying to go here.
Thank you for the question, Representative. I would say there's some very real carbon emissions benefits in how the fuel is produced. To your point, it is a drop-in fuel, but you have a significantly fewer emissions from producing this fuel. So when it is burned in the same engines, to your point, there is a decrease in that emissions.
Thank you. Senator Yates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I always like to, in these type of committees, when we get the information, I like to step back and say what would be the general benefit. I know sometimes we get really far down in the weeds, whether we talk about how individuals are driving around in corporate jets and things like that. And I always remember, I have to think, my grandfather, many of you knew, used to always say, just because, he meant the dietitian, but he used to say, just because a doctor sneaks a piece of cake doesn't mean overabundance of sweets and calories aren't bad for you. But he would use that as an example. But regardless, you're talking about the economic opportunities. In Kentucky, we wind up being a poor state year after year after year, and sometimes we put our ignorance ahead of what's best for the Commonwealth. And so anytime I'm looking at, and that's me, for instance, I'm always here learning. I'm not an expert in a lot of different areas. You hear me. Sometimes I ask bad questions onto it just to learn. But in the event that we know that we have the opportunity for a significant economic impact for our constituents, for our community, to me that says I have to have an open mind. And so while we may say, you know, I don't agree with this fidget, I don't think this, and the general idea, I think, oh, that might be silly. I remember we did that with technology for a long time. I was at home banging my head against the TV while I was watching, coming out of high school, some of the committee meetings we had here. Just not wanting to drag our feet so far behind. Right now, in the
Senator Yates, are you getting to your question?
Yep, I'm building up for it. I was leading up to it.
Please.
All right. In the event that we ignore this, in the event that we say, you know what, we don't want to participate, is there a chance that we'll lose, especially with the DHL and some of the other corporate individuals that work through CVG, that made commitments through other countries, through the European, through this? In the event Kentucky doesn't step up and do anything, is there a chance that we lose those corporate partners? And if so, can you tell us what type of economic impact, negative economic impact that could have on the Commonwealth of Kentucky?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I would say our coalition members, to the likes of UPS, DHL, Amazon, have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in this state. We collectively have done a great job of making the case of why Kentucky is a good place to invest. I think the fundamentals, as I shared before, make the argument for Kentucky very beneficial. I think we can get ahead of other states that are looking at this opportunity, and it is an economic development opportunity first and foremost. I think we can put ourselves ahead of some of those other states for investment. And if we don't take action, I think the risk, to your question, is that other states will beat us to the punch. So I think that was some of the reasoning in Montana. You have Illinois that passed a similar set of incentives, that you're going to see production go to those other places. To the questions before, it may come at some point. How do we, to your point, Senator, how do we get on the front end of that and make the case to our airline partners, our aviation partners, that Kentucky is thinking about what they need to succeed?
Okay, thank you, Senator Yates. Senator Berg.
I will be very direct and to the point. I have two questions, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Once production increases to the point where the supply is readily available, do we have an estimate of what we think the ultimate costs will actually drop to? And do you foresee a time in the future where this type of additive will be required to meet aviation emission standards?
Senator, to your first question, I don't have an estimate on ultimately what the costs are. Ideally, it will normalize to the point of where it replaces or is sufficient for what Jet A is today. And then to your point about, or to your question rather, about regulation and requirements, I don't think this country, and I don't think Kentucky is the right place for such an approach where it's regulated like that. I think an incentive that says, here's an economic development opportunity is, on the whole, across our country, a much better policy approach than, frankly, what the Europeans have done, which is said, you must only emit this, and we're going to fine you for everything else.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Last question. Well, almost last question. Representative Dixon.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for the presentation. You know, in some of the remarks that you had, and the question is, this fuel is something that's being looked at by multiple partners that you displayed on the board.
Yes, sir.
It is something not only just statewide, not only something national, but this is a global companies that are operating across the world that are trying to meet standards and look at innovative ways to not only meet those standards, but to obviously produce the best product at the lowest price.
Yes, sir.
The fuel currently, supply and demand is the issue.
Mm-hmm.
I think economic development, you made that clear, is kind of the purpose of looking at this option, because we are an aviation state and it is one of our key things here in Kentucky. But with that, one thing, you know, fossil fuels, coal, those things been mentioned in committee today. Marathon is on that board, correct?
Yep.
What is Marathon's part of this? You know, they are a fossil fuel company. They, you know, why would they be up there? Why would they be interested in this?
Representative, thank you for the question. Broadly, and the reason you've seen many folks globally in the oil and gas business, they're looking at this as the next type of fuel that if things continue on the path that they are, will be their newest line of business that can ultimately, and hopefully not a few decades from now, but in years, will be a profitable line of business for them. So I can't speak to Marathon's intentions as a company directly, but I can say from an industry perspective, that's why we have a great company like Marathon on the board, and I think they want to make this sort of investment in Kentucky.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Roberts, I cut you off earlier. I'll allow you one more very quick question, and we'll get on to our next presenter.
Thank you, Chairman. This has nothing to do with that, but Seth, since you're here, and we are the Transportation Committee, and CVG has been growing by leaps and bounds, would you take just a moment, if you would, to tell this committee about some of your new partnerships and some of the new people that you'll be bringing here for tourism and transportation in our state?
Sure. Thank you, Representative. I think many of you know we were very pleased to welcome British Airways to CVG on June 5th of this summer. They are our 14th passenger airline serving London Heathrow 5 times a week. So we're very excited about that flight. It's great for our state. The other piece I would say, kind of on the heels of President McFadden and Dennis talking about workforce, Representative Fleming knows this very well. We are there for the conversation around workforce. We're very lucky to have a private operator, Epic Flight Academy, currently building, we can see it out of our windows, building a flight school for aircraft mechanics, right? So complements the investments at Somerset, at Jefferson County, and a host of other activities. So please know that you all have a standing invitation to come visit us. I know our colleagues at Louisville and Lexington feel the same. Commercial aviation in this state really is thriving.
Seth, thank you so much
for
being here, and appreciate it. Our next one, last but not least, Sarah Jackson, Terry Sebastian on the regional offices for driver's license. And while she's coming up, you have Kenny Bishop sitting in the audience. If any of you all don't have Kenny's number, he's our legislative liaison. You have a transportation issue, give him a call. If you have a driver's license issue, I can't brag on Sarah enough how well she handles those issues when you have them. So, Sarah and Terry, the floor is yours. Please proceed. Not yet. Green light. No.
Now,
Pull it
sorry.
closer. Pull it closer to you.
She's got it on.
I've got it on now.
You do.
Oh,
yes.
yeah. I really want to thank you for inviting us today. I was looking at my notes, and I think the last time I appeared in front of an interim joint committee, this committee, was last September. So we've been really busy. I asked for your patience and understanding. I asked for you to give us time.
Sarah, can I interrupt you
Yes.
for a second?
Yes.
Since that last meeting, it's amazing how far you all have come. Are we where we want to be? No.
Not yet.
Not yet. But the improvement has been noticeable, and thank you for your efforts, and please proceed.
Well, I thank you for recognizing that. That's due to a great team, and it's an evolving team. We're still teaching and training and impressing customer service on our team members. So I can't say enough about the team back at the Transportation Cabinet. By way of reminder, and especially for those of you who are newer to the committee, I'm going to say this every time, this switch to a regional issuance model has been one of the most significant business process changes ever presented to a state government front-facing agency. We know and we expect there's more work to be done. Few quick factual updates. We have 32 driver licensing regional offices that are open and fully functional across the state. Our cumulative total of daily issuance numbers across the state are matching and in many cases exceeding the average cumulative total of daily issuance numbers when the Kentucky Circuit clerks were handling issuance. Nearly 400,000 Kentuckians have skipped a trip to a licensing office and renewed their driving credentials online in the last 2 years alone. 400,000, I want to emphasize this, 400,000 Kentuckians performed this task remotely, and that is without making a trip to a regional office. Kentuckians have also had the option of renewing or replacing lost or stolen credentials or completing an address change by mail-in. And 45,000 people have done that by mail-in since it was first offered in October of 21. Again, 45,000 people who didn't make a trip to our office, who had openings thereby for people who really needed a visit to the office, opening up more appointments and more availability. The real ID enforcement date is now set for May 7 of 25. I think I announced that last September, but I just, as a reminder, you do not need a real ID to board a plane or go on a military base in the U.S. before May 7th of 2025. And I do want to remind you and your constituents that you have other options, a passport, Department of Justice ID, etc. And then just to give you an update, 22.3% of our total credentials, this is through June, I believe, are issued in the form of real IDs. So we're at the 22.3% mark. It was expected by DHS when this program was mandated that Kentucky, because we were a voluntary state for real ID, meaning you don't have to get a real ID if you choose to use another form of real ID, it was estimated that we would be targeting about 30, they thought about, based on demographics, population, licensed persons in this state, about 35% of our population, maybe 40% will ultimately choose it. We want to deliver the best options for Kentuckians, and since I last visited with you in September, Terry Sebastian, who is here with me today and runs our pop-up program, and I undertook a major project of visiting all 32 regional offices, unannounced, random visits over the course of several months, observing everything from signage to efficiency to line management to wait time, and wait times for issuances, et cetera, all with the end goal of improving all aspects of customer service. So while we're still very much a work in progress, I want to share what's been a real focus of customer service initiatives in the last year. We added cash stations at every office. We had minimal cash stations when we opened, mainly because we had minimal employees to operate those. We added cash stations, and we added where indicated more cash stations, especially as we started noticing and taking data in certain regions of the Commonwealth where people only pay by cash. So we're trying to sort out a lot of these metrics and a lot of these measurements. We also are testing customer service friendly kiosks. These kiosks allow you to perform some of the same functions you could perform remotely. In other words, you can renew a real ID online, so you can do it at the kiosk. You can make an appointment online, you can do it at the kiosk. We found by having these, we're piloting them, seeing how many offices they might be effective in. There are people who get to an office, there is a wait if they don't have an appointment, and if they're told the wait is more than 10, 15, 20 minutes, they just leave and say they'll come back another day. We're training our staff, has been helping them say, what service do you really need? If you're only here to renew a driver's license, or you're only, or you really do need an appointment for a real ID, let's go to the kiosk and let's get this taken care of now. And then you've got a certain time to come back, or you've got the renewed license in the works. Statewide Saturday hours have started, and we now have them statewide. They're on the first Saturday of every month, and they're not by appointment. They're walk-ins. And we are currently monitoring the use of the customers of these Saturday hours, trying to determine, and again, it may be a regional thing, and we're trying to determine, before any further expansion in that area. Customer service feedback. We've instituted QR codes at every issuing station, as well as a little business card with an email box that you can send customer comments to. And most importantly, we are reading all of these customer comments. We have increased our public outreach within communities, festivals, and fairs. We're finding many times towns or counties would suggest we close because people couldn't get downtown during a festival or an event. And we would do what was asked of us because we figured there'd be no parking and no accessibility. Well, we're now finding get there, be open, have a desk out front, because people are coming from contiguous counties in for those fairs or events, and we can renew them while they're there, or we can explain to them what the process is. We're doing more of that. We're doing more educational work, and we've added more library partnerships. I know Senator Higdon has been a big promoter of that, and in many instances they've been great. We've had libraries that hand out mail-in forms, libraries that help people that don't have IT connections get on and renew their licenses, etc. We also during this time dispatched what I call specialized training teams, focusing on specific items like door management, issuance protocols, walk-in appointment management, and other just straight customer service issues. You know, may I help you? Not what are you here for? Appointment, walk-in oversight, more study has been given to this. I have to tell you, it varies from season to season. It varies from region to region how we balance the walk-ins versus appointments. And there are some regions that people just do not routinely make appointments. So in that instance, we open far more walk-in slots a day than appointments. We have seen, when I was here last in September, we were finding that a majority of our offices closed to walk-ins in the late morning, even early afternoon. Now, I think I announced to you we were putting it online when we were closing to walk-ins at particular offices. I've been monitoring walk-ins very carefully since last March and April, and I do a couple random checks a day. I rarely see our offices shutting down to walk-ins. That means they're assessing the line even as late as 3 o'clock and guaranteeing that those people in line will make it through by the end of the day. Now, it's been a little sketchy for the last week or two because I think we're faced like every operation right now is there's vacation time, plus people are trying to get their appointments taken care of while they're off, you know, on vacation also. So we're working hard on that. Also, we're monitoring customer credential delivery, making sure that when we say 10 to 14 days, the vendor is getting the card out in that time. It's much better. The United States Postal Service has improved its delivery rate with us. We've monitored that. The factory has tightened up its printing and delivery times. And then there's been an expansion of the mail-in renewal. In its first iteration, mail-in renewal was for any ID that you currently have. You could renew that license or ID card, real or standard. You could renew it for the same time period. So if you had a 4-year license, by mail-in, you could only get it renewed for 4 years. You couldn't choose an 8-year option. We're now giving you that option. So now people, there's no reason to go to the office just because you suddenly want yours to be 8 years. You can do that by mail if that's what you prefer. And we've also enlarged it to allow for name changes with the proper documentation. So we're adding even more remote functions. And I do want to point out that we also have adjusted, we have a new phone system for our customer service center. It is more efficient. It has chat bots, questions and answers, a callback option, and it's a huge modernization effort on the part of the Transportation Cabinet. And I do want to say that it is a recent award winner for the best application serving the government, recently awarded by Government Technology for Kentucky. So we're very proud of that. We think more customers are getting through to us in a more efficient manner, in a manner that suits their style. And then we have a newly launched website, and it has been much more customer friendly. We've gotten a lot of great feedback on that. So that's an overview of some, I probably haven't touched on everything, but those are some main customer initiatives we've been working really hard on. One of our popular remote offerings is the Mobile Driver Licensing Program, the pop-up program, which visits each Kentucky county that does not host a regional office. We've been asked today to just share some program highlights from that. Terry Sebastian, who works out of the Office of the Commissioner of Vehicle Regulation, is here today to share the successes of the program. But I have to tell you all, there's a lot of credit to be due him. He is the architect of the program. It was no small feat, as when the program was initially envisioned, and the program is statutory, when it was initially envisioned, we were going to launch the pop-ups from Frankfurt to 93 counties for a total of 215 plus visits a year. Terry came in, immediately revamped that initial design, and actually created various regional offices that we already have as hubs. And it was where we needed extra feedback, extra opinion, and extra eyes on a program. He will be quick to tell you that the program has a great team behind it. But I also want to tell you that most recently, the pop-up program won the Best IT Collaboration Among Organizations Award at the Government Technologies recent Kentucky IT Awards ceremony. And we're very proud of that because we consider that pop-up a partnership with the locals, a partnership with you all. And we've done remarkably with it. So with that, I'm going to turn, unless you want to take questions now, Senator, turn it over to Terry for some remarks on the pop-up.
Yep. Terry, we'll go ahead with you, and I want to thank you for your efforts on the pop-ups. We've heard a lot of good comments. And so the floor is yours. Identify yourself for the record, and please proceed.
First of all, I'll make sure I give Sarah that $20 for those last comments. My name is Terry Sebastian. I work in the I've got this one on in the Department of Vehicle Regulation. And first of all, I want to thank the chairman and the members of the committee for having us here today. A part of my job is to run the pop-up driver's license program. This is a portable program that is just one of our remote services that we offer Kentuckians across the state. Now, many of you all here today are familiar with the program. Over the last 2 years, Representative Upchurch and Senator Higdon has been gracious enough to have the program over to this very building to demonstrate its ability, and we appreciate you all having us do that. And we'd be more than happy to take the invitation for 2024. The program uses state-of-the-art technology to issue to Kentuckians who do not live in a county that houses a regional driver's license office. That is 93 counties. Last year, when we launched the program, we were able to serve those 93 counties successfully, holding 215 statutory pop-up visits and serving more than 7,000 Kentuckians. This year, 2023, in our 8th month, we are en route to mirror those successes that we had last year in 2022. You heard Sarah talk a little bit about the 32 regional offices. We were able to parse that down and have the pop-ups at 14 of these regional offices, meaning the 14 hubs across the state, staff from that office will go out and service 6 or 7 of those counties. We issue a majority of real IDs. Pop-ups remotely offer any service that the regional offices offer. And since a initial real ID is an in-person service, the pop-ups are beneficial for folks in that regard. We also renew CDLs, motorcycle license, IDs, and driver's license. But we also assist with disasters with our emergency pop-up program. Western Kentucky, when the tornadoes hit several years ago, our pop-up program was the first on the ground. We had gas cans and generators and our mobile equipment there at the beginning. Eastern Kentucky floods, we held 9 pop-ups at the FEMA centers in 9 different counties. In more recent, a disaster pop-up was a local fire disaster pop-up. This was on the account of 2 hazard apartment fires that displaced several members of the community in Perry County. And at the request of Representative Fugate and Representative Blanton, we were on the ground And the handout that we gave you guys that is online, there is a picture here of us at the emergency pop-up at the request of the two legislators. And we were able to issue 33 credentials to those individuals. Again, it was the collaboration. But the most important thing about that is you cannot get state or federal services without some form of identification. So by these two lawmakers asking us to come there, the Western Kentucky, the Eastern Kentucky disaster pop-ups, we were able to help put folks back on a track for their lives after a major disaster. And the collaboration with Representative Fugate and Representative Blanton has been at the forefront of this program since day one. When we decided to work in these 93 counties, we decided to go to the county judge executives in each county. And I have to credit Sarah Jackson for giving us that idea and nurturing it, because it has been a tremendous partnership. So why the county judges? The county judges are trusted leadership. They have their eyes and ears to the ground. They know the best locations in those communities for residents to attend the pop-ups, as well as they're able to get the word out through their offices and obviously through their local partners.
Terry, I hate to interrupt you.
Yes.
Our time's about up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thank you and Sarah so much for your presentation. We have a few questions. Like I said, we have about 5 minutes left. There's another meeting in this room at 3 o'clock. Senator Turner. Be brief, brother, be brief.
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll try to be direct to the questions. And I'll state this. When I went and got mine here, the new driver's license, I went over to the local office, and the only thing they did is had me fill out something and take my picture and say, this is going to Pennsylvania. If you haven't got your license in 10 days, call us and we'll see what the problem is. Is that still the same process?
Yes.
That's all that
yes.
new agency did, so these new buildings, that's all you do when somebody walks in there. Is that correct?
No, you should have been asked all the questions. I mean, they have a prompt that asks you all sorts of questions, from the medical questions to...
They have a form. I wrote it down, and it took about 5 minutes for him to ask me questions and took my pictures.
At one of our regional offices.
Right here in Frankfort.
Yes. Yeah, and you can do that online now.
Okay. That's the first question. Thank you for that. A couple follow-up, Mr. Mayor.
Yes,
this is real important. In Harlan County, you start from Harlan, it's 32 miles to Pineville, where the office is. My superintendent of both the high schools in the county have been on me bad because their students miss a day's schooling to go get their permit. They miss another day to go get their driver's license. And somebody's got to drive them as much as 100 miles round trip from most of my communities, from Lynch to Cumming to Everett to Overton Smith, whatever. And sometimes they'll have one little mistake and have to go back another day. And those kids don't get to make that school up. We're costing 2 days for every kid gets his driving lesson. That's punishment by any other. You just take a day off or something, you're going to get punished for missing school. Before this system started, we had a lady officer that gave the permit test right there in the courthouse in Harlan. A little bit of room was open for Judicial Center. And I always ask, why can't she one day, or he one day a week, stop there and let the kids, instead of them missing high school, or put a room out at the high school, the two high schools there, because that's where pretty much everybody's getting their permits. It ain't old people, but that's ongoing. And I don't see why we can't make a simple change, because I'm going to get the data of how many kids, how much education they've lost. And I'd like to have some financial data, and I'll ask for this afterwards. Some data about how many people go to Harlan from there. I want to get some data from the Pineville office to see what it's happening.
Senator
So can
Turner,
you tell
I'm
me,
gonna
I just
answer-
got
I'm
one
gonna-
question. I'll finish it up, boy.
Okay, go
Can
ahead.
you tell me, can you make a change to stop all them kids missing 2 days of school to get their driver's license?
I'm going to answer that
Yeah,
question.
it's under discussion.
Yeah. State police does that, not necessarily Sarah and her folks. Representative Blanton and I, that's one of our top goals, is to get something done, make some steps to keep those kids from missing 2 days of school, if they're lucky. I'm hearing kids missing 4 or 5 days of school because a lot of them are not passing their written test on the first time. So we're working on that, I promise you, and that's a goal of ours to get something done on that.
I'll help draft the statute.
Okay, thank you, sir. Representative Heffernan.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay.
Sarah, you know the question I'm going to ask already. First off, I do want to say thank you. You have been very willing to continuously work with me over the last few years on this. So my first question is, what is an update in Hardin County?
Okay. The first part of the update is that at last report, there was still some back and forth on floor plans for the new office. I think I may not have explained this. There's been a lapse. We were on target to have a new office, and the landlords shifted. In other words, new landlords came in and assumed that property, so now we're dealing with new landlords. That's the delay, but we're hopeful with the finance cabinet working diligently on us with the landlord that we're going to get that finalized and fit up. The question about why that's so important is that the layout of the current office is just not workable. It isn't time efficient. It isn't good for the visitors. We're doing the best we can with it. So I do want to mention that the E-Town regional current location has improved markedly. I myself have been down there many times compared to others. We've sent those special teams down there. They're an office that have an unusually high number of walk-ins. So we adjusted the schedule, and we make less time for appointments and more slots for walk-ins, and they have hardly closed to walk-ins in the last 3 months or so. And they are one of the ones that have the pilot kiosk project. And we've just worked really hard. I'm actually proud of the progress we've made there. Now, is it perfect? No. I am hopeful we'll have a new office in E-Town by the end of the year. But that's the update.
We're going to have a ribbon cutting when that happens. Okay.
We'll be there. And then I have a really quick follow-up, if that's okay.
No, I'm sorry. I'll come back to you. Yeah, ask after Representative Herron.
Thank you. I'm gonna be really quick. I have not been a huge fan of these regional offices. I actually lost my real ID and had to go get a replacement. And I went to one facility, was in line at 3 o'clock. At 3:45, they said, we're not taking any more appointments. And I had to go back to another facility the next day. And so for me, obviously I have a vehicle. I'm able to move about in the city. And so one of my concerns is that what does this mean for folks who don't have access to transportation? And then as it sounds like Representative Heffernan and Turner are talking about folks who don't have a regional facility in their county. So this new way has been very frustrating for myself. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Yep.
But then I do have a question about the kiosks. How many of those kiosks are in the Jefferson County offices?
I don't think we have any in Jefferson County right now, but that's why we're testing it a little in the outlying, because I don't want to add more confusion to the busy offices, but that's my goal. If they're working in the other offices and people are availing themselves of that opportunity, those are the kinds of places that it will really help.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm sorry that you will work harder at education, because when you lose a driver's license or it's stolen, that's that's what you can do by mail too. And you should not have been told while you were standing in line. We've worked harder and harder at that, but at any rate, thank you for the information.
Representative Elliott, last question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Where is the Danville office in terms of staffing? Because I've gotten some complaints about that office not being fully staffed.
As with some other offices, we're in a little flux with staffing. We rely heavily still on some temporary staff, and we're working on adding to the permanent staff. We've extended our reach of branch managers that supervise more than one office. So we're working very hard on it. The Danville office is certainly a priority in that mix.
Okay. Sarah, thank you.
Thank
Terry, thank you. When you come back next year, the report will be everything is hunky-dory, and we're hitting on all 8 cylinders.
Well-
But thank you for your work. I know you've worked hard to get us where we're at.
And I do want to end by just saying thank you to all of you, because you all have prodded us and you've begged us to do things and you've given us feedback, and it's made us better.
Yeah, if you do have a problem with a constituent of a driver's license, call Sarah. She's great about getting it resolved. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, September 19th at 1 o'clock in the same room. Motion to adjourn.